10 languages, sweetheart." Damien Thorne's booming laugh echoed, bouncing off Aurelia's crystal. "And you're serving me soup?" Rage, hot and familiar, bloomed in her chest. He had no idea. Years ago, she'd debated policy with presidents. Now she just poured water. Humiliating, wasn't it? But Thorne, with his casual cruelty, had just made a fatal error. See, Ara overheard things. Plans whispered between bites of Wagyu, deals inked with vintage wine. They thought she was invisible. They were wrong. Dead wrong. They had no idea how her quiet kindness hid a mind sharper than any blade in that kitchen. They also didn't know why she was really there, but they were about to find out. Boy, were they ever. Tonight he was laughing, his voice echoing across the dining room, aimed right at her. 10 languages, he boomed. "And you're serving me soup?" The room froze, but Ara didn't flinch. She simply met his gaze, and her next words would shatter his world, proving that the most dangerous person in the room isn't always the one at the head of the table. The scent of beeswax and old money clung to the air at Aurelia. It was a smell of Vance had come to associate with quiet humiliation. Here in the heart of New York City, Aurelia was not merely a restaurant. It was a cathedral of power where whispers over foie gras could launch companies or end careers. And Ara, number 27 on the service staff, was one of its invisible custodians. Her shift began, as it always did, in the hushed light of the late afternoon. The dining room was a sea of white linen, each table a stark island waiting for its occupants. Her station, by the imposing mahogany service bar, was immaculate. Her manager, Ms. Petro, a woman with a spine of steel and eyes that missed nothing, inspected her apron. Vance, Table 12's reservation notes. They want the 98 Lefetit decanted exactly 45 minutes prior. Not 44, not 46. Do you understand? Yes, Miss Petro. 45 minutes, Ara replied, her voice a perfect monotone of professional deference. Inside, she was translating the instruction into 4 different languages. A nervous tic she had developed. Courantis minutes. It was a way to keep the parts of her brain that mattered, the parts that used to matter, from atrophying. Ilara was a phantom living Clear's throat, in the wreckage of a brilliant life. Just 3 years ago, she was Dr. Ara Vance, a linguistics prodigy whose doctoral thesis on polyenthetic languages had been lauded as groundbreaking. She was the youngest simultaneous interpreter the UN had ever hired, moving seamlessly between Mandarin, Russian, Arabic, and German. She didn't just translate words. She translated intent, culture, and nuance. She had the ear of diplomats, the respect of academics. And then, in one catastrophic week, it was all gone. A highly sensitive diplomatic memo, one that had passed through her translation desk, was leaked to the press. The fallout was immediate and brutal. A peace summit collapsed. Accusations flew, and the evidence, planted with meticulous care, pointed directly to her. There was a tribunal, a quiet but ruthless dismissal. She was blacklisted, her name tarnished, her academic credentials rendered worthless. The man who had smiled at her over coffee every morning, her colleague and rival, Dr. Julian Reed, had offered his commiserations with a look of practiced pity. He was the one who had taken her position 2 weeks later. Now she was here. Her name was just Ara. Her most complex daily task was remembering who took their water sparkling and who took it still. The irony was suffocating. She, who had once debated nuclear policy in closed-door sessions, was now invisible. "Ara, focus!" Ms. Petrov's voice snapped her back. "The Thorne party is confirmed. Table 7, the flagship. You'll be on primary." R's stomach tightened. Table 7 was the worst. It was the large, circular booth in the back, shrouded in a loves, designed for privacy and power, and the Thorn Party meant only one person: Damien Thorn. Damien Thorn was not just wealthy, he was a force of nature, a private equity titan. He dismantled companies like a child pulling legs off a spider. He was known for his brutal negotiations, his icy charisma, and his utter contempt for the help. He was a regular at Aurelia, and he was universally feared by the staff. He wasn't just a difficult diner. He was a black hole of entitlement, sucking the light and energy from any room he entered. Ara took a steadying breath. It was just another table, just another man. Clear's throat. She spent an hour in the wine cellar, selecting the 98 Lefetit for table 12, her hand steady as she wiped the dust from the bottle. She polished silver until her reflection, distorted and fragmented, was all she could see. She was a ghost, and ghosts were good at being invisible. The doors opened at 7. The low hum of conversation began, the clinking of glasses, the soft scrape of cutlery on porcelain. Ara moved through the room with practiced grace, a ballet of service. She delivered amuse-bouches, refilled glasses, described the sourcing of the Norwegian halibut with a placid smile. At 8:03 p.m., the energy in the room shifted. A chill swept in from the lobby. Damien Thorn had arrived. He didn't just enter, he conquered. He was tall, dressed in a custom brony suit that probably cost more than her yearly salary. His watch, a PC Philolip perpetual calendar, glinted as he dismissed the hostess. He was flanked by 3 men, a severe-looking German, a watchful Japanese man, and a jovial, bear-like Russian. Clear's throat. They spoke in low, serious tones as they were led to table 7. Ms. Petro caught Ara's eye. Now, Vance, and not a single mistake. Ara smoothed her apron, picked up her silver tray, and walked toward the lion's den. The moment approached table 7, the air felt different, pressurized. Damien Thorn didn't look up. He was scrolling through something on his phone, his expression one of profound boredom. The other men, however, watched her. Good evening, gentlemen. My name is R, and I will be your server. May I begin with some water for the table? The Russian Mr. Vulov beamed. Ah, excellent. Yes, Voda, please. Still. And for my friends, he gestured to the others. The German Hermid nodded curtly, sparkling. The Japanese man, Mr. Tanaka, simply gave a slight bow. Still, thank you. Thorn finally looked up, his eyes a sharp Arctic blue. He didn't look at her, but through her. Just bring the menus and a bottle of your most expensive Japanese whiskey. The single malt. Don't ask me which one. You're paid to know. Of course, sir. The Yamazaki 25. An excellent choice, Ara said, her voice betraying no emotion. His eyes narrowed. Just slightly. Surprised she knew the name. Clear's throat. But the moment passed. Whatever. Just be quick. Ara retreated. The first test was passed. She procured the water, the menus, and the bottle, presenting it to Thorn, who waved it away. Pour it. She poured the amber liquid, the cost of each drop enough to pay her rent for a week. As she did, their conversation, which had paused, resumed. They weren't trying to be quiet. They simply assumed no one listening could possibly matter. They were discussing a deal, a big one. The conversation was a chaotic mix of English, German, and Russian. They were merging their various technological assets to bid on a new satellite communications network. The key is the access point in the Baltic, Mitt said in German. Without that, the entire bandwidth proposition fails. Pavel assures me the permits are a formality. Mr. Vulov boomed in Russian. A few gifts to the right ministers and the port is ours. I don't like it, Thorn cut in, his English sharp. It's messy, and the current sanctions list is volatile. Mr. Tanaka, who had been silent, finally spoke in Japanese. Sanctions are only a problem if the technology is classified as dual use. If we route the hardware through my subsidiary in Singapore, we can reclassify the shipment. ARA clearing the bread plates didn't even blink. She understood every word. She knew exactly what dual use meant in this context. It meant technology that could be used for both civilian and military purposes. And she knew that what Tanaka was proposing wasn't just reclassifying. It was a deliberate, illegal maneuver to bypass international armed sanctions. She kept her face a perfect, placid mask. She was a waitress. She was there to take their order. "Are you ready to order, gentlemen?" Thorne was annoyed by the interruption. He pointed at the menu. "The tomahawk steak rare. And tell the chef if it's even a degree over, I'm sending it back." The others gave their orders. Vulov wanted the borscht like my babushka made. Schmidt wanted the Wiener Schnitzel Tanaka, the black cod. Ilara recited the order back flawlessly, including Thorne's threat, which she phrased as the tomahawk, prepared rare. Understood. For the next hour she served them. She moved in and out of their bubble of power, refilling their whiskey, clearing their plates, all while they constructed their conspiracy in plain sight. They were arrogant, protected by the armor of their wealth and the mistaken belief that the woman pouring their wine was deaf and dumb. They were finalizing the details of what they were calling Project Chimera. "So we are agreed," Thorne said, leaning in. Clear's throat. "Julian Reed's team will handle the financial transfer as soon as the Shell Corp is active." AR froze. The name hit her like a physical blow. Julian Reed, the man who had ruined her, the man who had stolen her life. Her hand, holding a pitcher of ice water, trembled for a fraction of a second. Julian Reed. His team. Julian worked for Damien Thorne. The revelation was so profound, so sickening, that she almost dropped the picture. She recovered, her knuckles white. It all made sense. The slickness of her framing, the sudden, insurmountable legal wall she had hit. It hadn't just been a rival's ambition. It had been backed by the kind of power that could make tribunals disappear, the kind of power that laughed at sanctions at Table 7. Clear's throat. She had to get out. She had to breathe, she murmured. "Excuse me, sir," and retreated to the service station, her heart hammering against her ribs. It wasn't just a job anymore. She wasn't just a ghost. She was a witness. The main courses had been cleared, and the men at Table 7 were moving on to coffee and digestives. The deal was essentially done, and the mood had lightened. They were laughing, boasting. Damien Thorne, clearly the king of this table, leaned back, a smug smile on his face. Mr. Volkov was telling a story about a competitor in Moscow, a long, rambling anecdote that involved a yacht, 2 twins, and a great deal of vodka. He told it in Russian with broad gestures. Herr Schmidt and Mr. Tanaka, however, clearly didn't understand him, and were looking to Thorne for a translation. Thorne, whose Russian was clearly conversational but not fluent, was struggling. He held up a hand. "Hold on, Roman. You're going too fast." He pulled out his phone, a sleek, custom device. "Let's try this new app. My tech division just bought the startup. Supposedly translates in real time." He activated the app and pointed it at Vulov. Vulov, delighted, repeated the punchline. The phone's robotic voice spit out the bear. He entered the bicycle with the festive hats. Volkov looked confused. Schmidt and Tanaka looked bored. The app had missed the entire cultural context. The slang, the point. Thorne's face darkened. He hated when his technology, his property, failed. He tossed the phone onto the table with a clatter. Useless. "It is a complex idiom, Damien," Volov said, switching to slightly broken English. "It means he was made the fool, but he thought he was the clever one." "A useful idiot, as it were," Ara said quietly. She hadn't meant to. The words just slipped out, She was refilling their water glasses, an invisible presence, and the linguistic puzzle-solving part of her brain had simply provided the answer. The conversation stopped. All four men turned to look at her. It was the first time they had all truly seen her as a person. Thorne's eyes narrowed to slits. "What did you say?" Ara straightened. "The damage was done." "I'm sorry, sir. I was just clarifying. The phrase Mr. Vulov used, pedili. It's an old expression. It refers to someone being tricked into performing a role they don't understand, much like a trained bear on a bicycle. A useful idiot is the closest English equivalent." A heavy, dangerous silence descended on the table. Mr. Vulov stared at her, his jaw slack. Mr. Tanaka's eyebrows rose high on his forehead. Thorne, however, looked insulted. He had been upstaged by a waitress. "You speak Russian?" he asked, his voice deceptively soft. "Yes, sir," Ara replied. "And English." Obviously, he sneered. What else? A little high school Spanish. The blood was rushing in her ears, the familiar heat of indignation. But she held Miss Petrov's rules in her mind. Never engage. De-escalate. Apologize. "I also speak German, sir," she said, nodding to her Schmidt. And Japanese, she nodded to Mr. Tanaka and several others. "I apologize for the interruption." She tried to step back to disappear again, but Thorne wasn't done with her. He was insulted, and he wanted to reassert his dominance. He let out a short, barking laugh. It was a horrible, dismissive sound. "Several others?" "How many is several, sweetheart?" "10, sir. I'm fluent in 10. This time Thorne threw his head back and laughed. It was a full-throated, booming, humiliating laugh that echoed across the restaurant. Diners at other tables turned to look. Ms. Petro across the room looked like she was about to have an aneurysm. 10 languages, Thorne announced to his table, wiping a tear from his eye. "This woman, this waitress, claims she speaks 10 languages, and she's serving me soup." His companions chuckled nervously, following his lead. "That's quite a party trick," Thorne continued, turning his icy gaze back on her. "Tell me, if you're so brilliant, why are you here? Why aren't you running the UN? Or, I don't know, at least a decent translation app?" He smirked, tapping his useless phone. The humiliation was complete. He had reduced her entire life, her mind, her education, to a failed party trick. He had dismissed her as worthless. This was the moment, the breaking point. The ghost in the machine decided to speak. Ara didn't apologize. She didn't back down. She stood very still, and the lifetime of practiced professional deference fell away from her like a cloak. Her expression, which had been placid and empty, sharpened into something focused, analytical, and cold. She looked Damien Thorne directly in the eye. The man who had, through his surrogate Julian Reed, destroyed her life. The man who was at this very table committing international crimes. He was still smiling, waiting for her to crumble. "You're right, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice clear and carrying, though no louder than before. "It is a useful skill." Damien Thorne's smile faltered. He had expected tears or a flustered apology or a retreat. He had not expected this sudden, unnerving calm. He hadn't expected the steel. "A skill," Ara continued, her gaze unwavering, "that allows one to understand complex discussions, even when they are intentionally fragmented." "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" Thorne snapped, his patience gone. Ara took a half-step closer to the table, entering their sacred circle of power. She looked past Thorne directly at her Schmidt. "For example," she said, her accent shifting to a flawless, crisp, high German. "I understood your concern about Project Chimera relying on the Baltic access point. You're worried that the permits are not a formality at all, and that Mr. Vulov is underestimating the new EU regulatory protocols. You believe he is compromised? Herr Schmidt's face went white. He physically recoiled as if she had struck him. Clear's throat. Before Thorne could react, Ara turned her gaze to Mr. Tanaka. Her voice softened, her cadence changing as she switched to perfectly polite, formal Japanese. And I understood your very clever solution, Tanaka-san, to reroute the dual-use hardware through the Singapore subsidiary to reclassify it. A direct violation of the Wassenaar arrangement. A very bold and very illegal maneuver to bypass the sanctions. Mr. Tanaka's sharp intake of breath was the only sound he made. He froze, his hand halfway to his coffee cup. Then Ara turned to Mr. Vulov. Her Russian was fluid, infused with just the right touch of Moscow familiarity. And you, Mr. Vulov, you assured them the gifts were handled. But you also mentioned to Herr Schmidt, when Mr. Thorne was on the phone, that you were feeding the bears just enough to keep them sleepy. You were referring to your partners, not the ministers, weren't you? Vulov's jovial mask dissolved. He looked at Thorne, then at his eyes wide with panic. Finally, Ara's gaze landed like a physical weight on Damien Thorne. He was no longer laughing. He looked as if he had been carved from ice. His face was ashen. He was for the first time in his adult life completely and utterly speechless. "And you, Mr. Thorne," Illa said, switching back to cold, clear English. "You tied it all together. You were worried about the sanctions, but not worried enough. And you approved the financial transfer to be handled by Julian Reed's team." She let the name hang in the air, a venomous, glittering thing. The silence in the restaurant was now total. The other diners were pretending not to watch, but every ear was strained in their direction. Miss Petro was rooted to the spot by the hostess stand, her hand over her mouth. "I believe, sir," Ara said, the slightest, most dangerous hint of a smile touching her lips, "that you have what you would call exposure. Your entire multi-billion-dollar Project Chimera is not only in violation of international law, but it's built on a foundation of partners who are already planning to betray each other. And I am the only person in this room who knows the full picture. Because I'm the only one who understood all the pieces." She paused, letting the magnitude of her words settle. "Now," she said, her voice returning to a neutral, professional tone. "Would any of you gentlemen care for dessert? The creme brulee is excellent this evening." Damien Thorne didn't speak. He just stared at her. The cogs were turning, the calculations running. He had been assessed, analyzed, and summarily dismantled by the waitress. He had laughed, and she had responded by holding a metaphorical lit stick of dynamite to his entire empire. He slowly raised one hand and pointed a single trembling finger at her. "You," he whispered, his voice, "in my office tomorrow. 7 a.m. "I'm sorry, sir," Era replied, picking up the empty water pitcher. "I'm scheduled for a double shift tomorrow. I'm afraid I'm not available." Thorne looked for a second like he might actually explode. But then a strange, terrifying new expression crossed his face. It was not anger. It was not laughter. It was respect. "Cancel it," he ordered. He pulled a black metal business card from his jacket and slapped it on the table. 7 a.m., don't be late." He threw his napkin onto his plate. "Gentlemen, I believe this dinner is over." Without another word, he and his 3 shell-shocked associates stood up and walked out of the restaurant, leaving a table full of half-eaten food and a shocked silence in their wake. Ah stood by the table for a moment. Then, with a steady hand, she began to clear the plates. The alley behind Aurelia was dark, damp, and smelled of sour wine and bleach. It was 1:30 a.m. AR's shift had finally ended. Miss Petro had said only one thing to her after the incident. "You're fired, Vance. Clean out your locker." Ara hadn't argued. It didn't matter. The thought of polishing another glass, of being invisible, was suddenly unbearable. She had walked out of the restaurant, her few belongings in a tote bag, and into the alley. A long black sedan was parked at the mouth of the alley, its engine a low, menacing purr. She hadn't expected Thorne to wait. As she passed, a rear door opened. "Get in." It wasn't a request. Ah sighed, adjusted her bag, and slid onto the plush leather seat. The interior of the car was silent. Insulated from the city, Damien Thorne sat opposite her, illuminated by the dim glow of the dashboard. He looked tired, but his eyes were ferociously bright. The car pulled silently into traffic. "Who are you?" he asked. It was the same question as before, but the sneer was gone. "I told you, R. Vance." "Dr. R. Vance," he corrected her. "Formerly of the U.S. State Department, linguistics prodigy, top-level security clearance, accused of leaking the Kovalchuk diplomatic memo 3 years ago. Disgraced, disavowed, blacklisted. He had been busy for the last few hours." "You've had a thorough background check run," she clears throat, stated unimpressed. "I don't like surprises, Dr. Vance, and you are a very big surprise. My security team is currently having a collective panic attack that you got within 3 FT of me. I was serving you scallops, Mr. Thorne, not trying to assassinate you." "You did worse," he shot back. "You blew up a $1 billion deal and implicated my associates in criminal conspiracy, all because I laughed at you." Ah turned to look at him, the city lights sliding over her face. "No, I did it because you said the name Julian Reed." Thorne leaned forward. "This is the part I'm interested in. You know Reed?" "I know him," Ilara said, her voice dropping. The old wound suddenly raw. "He was my colleague, my friend. We were the top 2 translators in the department. He was ambitious, but I was better. When the Kovalchuk memo came across my desk, it was encrypted. I translated it, and I sent it up the chain. Standard procedure." "But it leaked," Thorne finished. "It leaked," she agreed, "and the digital signature on the leak pointed to my workstation. The password used was my mother's maiden name. It was a perfect frame-up. I was dragged into a hearing. I had no defense. My life was over in 48 hours. And Julian, he was the one who discovered the breach. He was promoted into my vacant position a week later, and now he's your head of acquisitions." The car was silent again. Thorne processed this. "He's good," Thorne admitted, almost to himself. "Ruthless, efficient. He brought me the Chimera deal, put the partners together. Schmidt, Tanaka, Vulov. It was his brainchild. And he put you all in a room where a waitress could hear you," Ara said. "Where you could hear me," Thorne corrected. "A 1 in a million chance. He couldn't have known you worked there." "Couldn't he?" Ara asked. The thought was new and chilling. Or maybe he did. Maybe he's known where I was this whole time. Maybe he enjoys the fact that the woman whose career he destroyed is now living on minimum wage, polishing silver. Maybe he wanted me to hear it. "Why?" Thorne asked. "That makes no sense. Why would he risk his own deal?" "Because, Araed, the pieces clicking into place with terrifying speed. The deal isn't his end game. He isn't compromised if it fails. You are Schmidt, Tanaka, and Vulov are. What if the leak wasn't an accident? What if he's planning to expose Project Chimera himself after he's taken his cut? He could be playing a much deeper game, shorting your stock, selling the intel to a competitor or to a government. He frames me for the first leak, and he frames you for the second. He walks away clean twice." Damien Thorne, the man who prided himself on being 10 steps ahead of everyone, stared out the window. He was a predator who had just realized he was walking into a trap. Julian Reed wasn't just his employee. He was a viper Thorne had welcomed into his house. "The man at the table tonight," Ara said. "The one who framed me. He works for you. He is at this very moment lining your company up for a catastrophic failure. You humiliated me tonight, Mr. Thorne. You laughed at me. But Julian Reed, he's been laughing at you for months." Thorne's jaw clenched. The tick was back. He had been played. "The meeting," he said, his voice a low growl. 7 a.m. "It's not a request. It's a job offer. You're not fired from the restaurant, Dr. Vance. You're promoted. Promoted to what? My new head of damage control. Your first assignment. Prove it. Prove what you just said. And then you and I are going to help Mr. Reed find a new, less prominent career. I'm not a corporate spy, Mr. Thorne. No, you're a witness. And you're a linguist. Reed is smart, but he's arrogant. He's been communicating with his partners, and I guarantee you he thinks no one can understand him. He doesn't know about you. You are my ghost, my secret weapon." He tapped a button, and a privacy screen slid up, separating them from the driver. "You help me fix this," Thorne said, his voice now pure business. "You help me save my company from the man he put in place, and I will do more than clear your name. I will give you the resources to tear Julian Reed's life down to the studs. I will personally hand you the match." Ara looked at the man who just hours before had mocked her existence. It was a deal with the devil, but this devil was offering her the one thing she craved more than air. Justice. "I'll need access to your servers." Ara said all of them. "And," clears throat, "a direct line to your internal security." Thorne smiled. It was a cold, sharp, predatory smile. "Welcome to the team, Dr. Vance." Thorne's corporate headquarters was a spear of glass and steel in downtown Manhattan. At 6:58 a.m., Ilara walked in, not through the service entrance, but through the main lobby. She was still wearing her black waitress pants and comfortable shoes, a stark contrast to the parade of designer suits. The security guard at the front desk, however, had her name. He handed her a black, unmarked access card. "Top floor. Mr. Thorne is waiting." The elevator opened directly into Thorne's penthouse office. It was a vast, minimalist space with a 180-degree view of the city, still dark and glittering. Thorne was standing by the window, a cup of coffee in hand. He hadn't slept. "Dr. Vance. Good. You're punctual." He pointed to a large glass-walled conference room. "That's your new office. My tech team has set up a terminal with complete access to our internal servers, including all of Reed's communications. Email, instant messages, server logs, everything." "He won't know?" Ara asked. "It's a ghost access port. He'll see nothing. You have 48 hours. At noon on Friday, I have a final video conference with Schmidt, Tanaka, and Vyulov to sign the final wire transfer agreements. I need your proof before then. If I don't have it, I have to kill the deal and eat the loss. If I do have it..." He left the threat hanging. Ara walked into the conference room. A powerful workstation sat on the desk. She sat down, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt the familiar, exhilarating rush of a hunt. She started with Reed's emails. They were clean. Too clean. All his communication about Chimera was official by the book. He was covering his tracks. "He's not stupid," Ara said, speaking to Thorne through an open intercom. "He's not using corporate email." Clear's throat. "Then find what he is using." Thorne's voice barked back. Ara dug deeper. She went into server logs, looking for unusual data packets from Reed's workstation. She found it. A steady encrypted data stream pinging a private server in the Cayman Islands. It was a dead end. She couldn't breach the encryption. "It's encrypted. I can't get in," she said. "Then find the key." She leaned back, thinking, How would Julian think? He was arrogant. He loved to show off. He loved languages almost as much as she did. He wouldn't just use a simple password. He would use something clever. She went back to his corporate messages, not the emails, but the internal chat logs with his team. He was managing a dozen projects. She scanned thousands of lines of text, looking for a pattern. There, a message to his assistant about a file. File is locked. Key is the Aramaic word for thunder. Use the classical spelling. Another one. Send the file to legal. Password is the god of boundaries in Roman mythology. Janus. He's using linguistic trivia as his passwords, Ara whispered. He was showing off. Now she had to find the right trivia. She went back to the encrypted data stream. The file names were just numbers, but the logs were time-stamped. She cross-referenced the timestamps with his calendar. Every time he had a call with only Mr. Tanaka, there was a data transfer. Every time he spoke with only Herr Schmidt, another he was communicating with them individually, playing them against each other. She focused on the Tanaka files. Julian's Japanese was good, but his cultural knowledge was academic. He was obsessed with the Han period. "What's the password, Julian?" she muttered, her fingers flying. She tried Murasaki. Fail, she tried Kyoto. Fail, she tried Genji, access denied. She thought what was his specific thesis on Heian-era poetry. There was a specific obscure poetic form he loved. She typed Roa, access granted. The file opened. It was a private message log between Julian and Tanaka, and it was all in Japanese. But not just Japanese. It was a mix of modern Japanese, old Heian-era court language, and complex financial terms. It was designed to be untranslatable by any machine and unreadable by 99.9% of human translators, but not by AR. She began to read, and her blood ran cold. Julian was betraying them. He was convincing Tanaka that Thorne and the Germans were planning to cut him out of the loop after the deal was signed. He was offering Tanaka a separate deal, help him sabotage Project Chimera, and they would buy up Thor's stock when it crashed, taking over the company for pennies on the dollar. "I have it," Ara said, her voice shaking with rage and triumph. "I have the Tanaka correspondence. He's planning a hostile takeover with him, using the sanctions violation as leverage." "Good," Thorne's voice came back. "Now get the others." It was easier now. She knew the pattern. For Hamid, the password was Nalongan lied. For Mr. Vulov, it was a phrase from a Pushkin poem. Clear's throat. By on Friday, Ara had a complete, undeniable record of Julian Reed's treachery. He was playing all three partners against each other, all while positioning himself to be the sole beneficiary of the project's implosion. He had even drafted a press release ready to be leaked that blamed Damien Thorne for the entire criminal conspiracy. He was using the exact same playbook he had used on her. "He's a true artist," Ilara said, printing the last of the evidence. "He's a dead man," Thorne replied. He looked at his watch. "The video conference is in 4 hours. Dr. Vance, go get some rest and buy yourself a new suit. Put it on my account." "I'm fine in this," Ara said. "No," Thorne said, looking at her not as a boss, but as a co-conspirator. "You're not a waitress anymore. When you walk into that boardroom, I want you to look like the woman who just saved my company, and the woman who was about to end Julian Reed." His main boardroom at Thorne Industries was a fortress of glass, and silence perched 50 stories above the city. The air was cold, recycled, and carried the faint, expensive scent of leather. At the head of a 20-foot obsidian table sat Damien Thorne, his face a mask of calm. At his right hand, Julian Reed, immaculate in a bespoke suit, shuffled a stack of documents. He radiated a smug, unassailable confidence. He was the master of ceremonies, the puppet master about to collect his prize. "If everyone is ready," Julian said, his voice smooth as oiled machinery, "we can begin the final signing protocol. Damien, the initial transfer is sued." "Gentlemen," he nodded to the massive high-definition screen that dominated the far wall, "I trust your financial teams are standing by." On the screen, the three partners stared back. Mr. Tanaka from Tokyo gave a curt bow. Herr Schmidt from Berlin looked impatient. Mr. Vulov from a lavishly decorated office in Moscow beamed. "Let us sign. This is a historic day, Julian. My congratulations on this synergy." "Thank you, Roman," Julian said, a small controlling smile playing on his lips. It was a complex framework to build. The main boardroom door hissed open. The click of heels on the marble floor was the only sound. It was sharp, deliberate, and rhythmic. Every man in the room, including those on the screen, turned. Julian's smile froze. His eyes widened, first in confusion, then in a flicker of recognition. He squinted. "Ara, what on earth?" He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Damien, has the restaurant started a new coffee service?" "I'm afraid we're in the middle of..." Ara Vance did not stop walking until she stood at the foot of the table directly opposite Thorne. She was not wearing her black and white uniform. She was dressed in a razor-sharp, dark charcoal suit that screamed authority. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant knot. The apologetic, invisible waitress was gone. In her place stood a woman who looked like she could and would dismantle kingdoms. "Julian," Thorne said, his voice cutting through Julian's confused babble, "this is not your server. I believe you are already acquainted, but allow me to reintroduce you. This is Dr. R. Vance, my new head of strategic intelligence and risk analysis." Julian Reed's face went white. It wasn't the white of a ghost. It was the sickly grey white of spoiled milk. He half rose from his chair, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. He stared at, as if she had just materialized from his worst nightmare. "Dr. Vance," Thorne continued, gesturing to the screen, "has been conducting a last-minute audit on Project Chimera. She has findings. Dr. Vance, the floor is yours." R placed a slim tablet on the table. She looked past Julian, past Thorne, and locked her gaze on the screen. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, her voice clear and cold. "I've spent the last 36 hours reviewing the architecture of your project, and I must say, Mr. Reed," she glanced at him, "it's a fascinating piece of work, a true house of cards." "What is this?" Hamit barked from the screen. "We are here to sign, not listen to some new consultant." "My apologies, Hamit," Ilara replied, and her voice shifted, flowing into a flawless, analytical German. "But you, of all people, should be concerned, specifically with the private communications you've been having with Mr. Reed. Your password was Nabelungen lied, wasn't it? Fitting. A story about a cursed ring of gold and absolute betrayal." Schmidt frozen. "I particularly enjoyed your plan," Ilara continued in German, "to use the force majeure clause in the event of a sanctions leak. A leak you were anticipating to seize the Baltic port assets from Mr. Vulov, locking him out completely. You called it a necessary corporate amputation." Schmidt's face turned a deep, mottled red. "This is slander," like an outrage boomed Vulov in Russian. "He planned this." "Please, Mr. Vulov, sit down," Ara said, her language switching again, this time to a fluid, precise Russian. "You're hardly an innocent party. Your plan was, if anything, more direct. Your private password, the line from Pushkin. It is not hard to deceive me. I am glad to be deceived. You were counting on their greed to make them blind." Vulov, who had been halfway out of his chair, sank back down, his jovial expression gone, replaced by a look of cold fury. You assured Mr. Reed, Ara said, that once the deal was funded, you would use your government contacts to have both Hare and Mr. Tanaka declared security risks, thereby nullifying their shares and allowing you to liquidate their assets through your new shell corporation in Cyprus. You are going to steal everything. Lies. She is lying, Vulov shouted. Am I? Ara turned her attention to the last screen. Tanakan. Her Japanese was a soft, sharp blade, polite, formal, and utterly deadly. And you were perhaps the most clever. Mr. Reed's password for your files was Rower from the Hon-era poem about impermanence. How poetic. You weren't planning on stealing from your partners, were you? You were planning on destroying your boss. Thorne leaned forward, his expression unreadable. I have your encrypted messages with Mr. Reed, Ara said in Japanese. You were coordinating a massive short sale of Thorne Industries stock set to execute the moment Mr. Reed's anonymous tip about the sanctions violation hit the press. You weren't just betraying your partners. You were planning a hostile takeover of this entire company, with Mr. Reed, of course, as your new CEO. The virtual room exploded. Schmidt was shouting in German, Vulov in Russian, and Tanaka was stone-faced, but his aide could be seen scrambling in the background. The alliance was not just broken. It had been revealed as a fiction from the very beginning. And through it all, Julian Reed sat paralyzed. He was a statue of pure, unadulterated terror. His plan, his clear as throat, perfect, intricate, multilingual plan had just been read back to him. Piece by agonizing piece. And that, Ilara said, her voice dropping, brings me to you, Julian. She turned, her whole body reorienting to face the man at the table, the man who had stolen her life. You, she said, her voice now filled with a cold, personal venom that made him flinch. You are the true artist. You played them all. You fed their greed, their paranoia. You promised each of them the crown, knowing you were building a scaffold. You set them all up to take the fall. Damien. Julian finally choked out, his voice a strangled whisper. Damien, this is insane. She's a disgruntled ex-employee, a waitress. I had to fire her 3 years ago from the State Department. She's unstable. She leaked the Kovalchuk memo. Yes, Ara said. The Kovchuk memo. Your first masterpiece, your dress rehearsal for this. She tapped her tablet. The main screen behind her flickered, and the faces of the partners were replaced by a document, a press release. You use the same playbook, Julian. It's your one and only trick. Frame the subordinate. Take their job. Frame the boss. Take his company. This, she pointed to the screen, is a press release from your private encrypted server. The one you thought was hidden. It's dated for next Monday. It's an anonymous leak detailing Project Chimera and the full extent of its criminal sanctions busting activities. It names one man as the architect. She hit another key, and the text scrolled. The entire operation, sources say, was conceived and directed by billionaire titan Damien Thorne. Julian made a sound, a high-pitched keen of despair. You were going to frame him, Ara said, just like you framed me. You were going to send him to prison, tank his company, and walk away with the keys to the kingdom alongside Mr. Tanaka. You are a parasite, Julian, and you are fundamentally unoriginal. This is illegal. Julian suddenly shrieked, finding his voice. He stood up, knocking his chair over. You hacked me. This is entrapment, fruit of the poisoned tree. It's all inadmissible. Damien, you can't listen to this. She's a criminal. She hacked company property. Who are you going to believe? Me? Your right hand? The man who built this deal? Or her? And nobody you met yesterday who's bitter and broke. Damien Thorne looked at Julian. He looked at the screaming man, his suit rumpled, his face slick with sweat. Then he looked at Lara, who stood calm, her case made, her hands clasped behind her back. Thorne slowly stood up to his full height. "That's a very good question, Julian. Who do I believe?" He walked around the table until he was standing next to Julian, who was breathing heavily. "I believe," Thorne said, his voice a low growl, "the person who just saved my company, not the person who tried to slit its throat. You're right, Julian. This isn't a courtroom. This is an internal audit. You used my servers on my time to commit multiple felonies. You weren't hacked. You were caught." Thorne pressed a button on his desk. "Intercom security. Send them in." "No." Julian lunged. Not for Thor, but for the tablet. "You won't ruin me." He never got the chance. The boardroom doors opened, and 2 large security guards, men who were usually reserved for protecting Thorne himself, entered. They each took one of Julian's arms in a grip of steel. "Damien, no, please." Julian's dignity evaporated. He was pulling, struggling. It was a contingency plan, a stress test. "You can't do this. I made you billions, and you tried to cost me my freedom," Thorne said. "You're fired. Your assets are frozen, and I suspect my new consultant, Dr. Vance, will be turning her findings over to the Department of Justice by the end of the day." "You," Julian twisted, his face contorted in a mask of pure, undiluted hatred aimed at Ara. "You did this. You were nothing. A ghost. A waitress. I destroyed you." The guards began to drag him out of the room, his expensive shoes scraping on the marble. Ara stepped aside, watching him go. "No, Julian," she said, her voice quiet but carrying. "You didn't destroy me. You just misplaced me." The doors hissed shut, cutting off his last desperate scream. A heavy silence filled the room. Ara turned back to the screen. The 3 partners looked like men on their way to their own execution. "Now," Damien Thorne said, straightening his tie as he returned to the head of the table. "Gentlemen, as you've just seen, Project Chimera is dead. It was a criminal enterprise from its inception." He sat down and steepled his fingers the picture of a patient predator. "Here is your new reality," he said. "Dr. Vance has in her possession enough evidence to have all 3 of you arrested and extradited for conspiracy to violate international sanctions, wire fraud, and a host of other crimes that will put you in a concrete cell for a very long time. Your assets will be seized and your companies will be dismantled." He let that sink in. Or he continued, "You listen to a new proposal. Dr. Vance, in her audit, discovered that the underlying technology, stripped of its illegal applications, is actually brilliant. She has spent the last 8 hours designing a new project. We're calling it Project Aegis. It is fully compliant, fully legal, and according to her projections will be twice as profitable as Chimera within 3 years. He looked at each of them. "You will not be partners. You will be suppliers. You will sign new exclusive and extremely restrictive contracts with Thorne Industries. All communications will be routed through Dr. Vance. She will have full unrestricted audit access to all of you 24/7. You will operate with, as I said before, complete transparency. You will do exactly as she says, and in return you will make a great deal of money, and you will not go to prison." Thorne smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Dr. Vance will be sending you the new contracts. You have 1 hour to sign. Welcome to the team." He reached out, and with a single tap ended the call, plunging the screen into darkness. The room was silent. Thorne walked to a polished wood cabinet and took out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. He poured 2. "Neat." He walked over to Ara and handed her one. "Aegis," he said. "Good name. The shield of the gods." "I thought it was appropriate," Ara said, taking the glass. Her hand was perfectly steady. "You have a new lexicon, Dr. Vance," he said, raising his glass. You no longer just translate languages. You speak the one that matters. And what language is that, Mr. Thorne? Leverage, he said. The only one everyone understands. He clinked his glass against hers. Welcome to the company. That's the story of how a single sentence spoken in the right language toppled an empire of deceit. Our Vance went from being a ghost in a gilded cage to the most powerful person in the room. She reminded a billionaire and the world that you should never ever judge a person by the uniform they wear. The mind inside is the only weapon that matters, and hers was sharper than any knife in that kitchen. What did you think of Ara's revenge? It just goes to show that the quietest person in the room is often the one you should be listening to the most. If you enjoyed this story of hidden talents and karmic justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss a new story. We post new dramas every week. Finally, share this video with someone who loves a good twist. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next.